Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Slotherhouse. It's a weird one for this video today, and if you hear the title, yes, it is about a killer sloth in a sorority that just goes on a rampage. It's had a one night only release in theaters, so I got a chance to see it in theaters, and after this point it's probably going to go to streaming at some point or video on demand or somewhere, so if you have a chance to check it out, I would recommend it because this movie is a wild fun time. And I will be getting to spoilers in this review, but really quick before I get into the actual spoilers, let me just give you a brief, idea of what I thought about this movie. And so I essentially went into this film thinking that it was just going to be a really bad movie that's going to be good because of how bad it was. You know, those type of movies like Sharknado or Velocipaster, which are classics on their own right. And so that is what I was expecting from this movie. I wasn't expecting it to be well made. I wasn't expecting the cinematography to be good. I wasn't expecting the comedy in this movie to be intentional, but I got the complete opposite of that because this movie is actually a fairly well-made movie with some great cinematography, surprisingly, that has a lot of great comedy that is all intentional. I think that is the charm of this movie because it is a genuinely well-made movie to a surprising degree. Even the special effects in this movie with even the text bubbles that pop up or just the practical sloth that they had some money put into this thing, even though it is still extremely low budget. They had enough money to put actual effort into making this an actual good B-movie horror experience. So let's get into the spoilers for this movie. And like I said, it's about a killer sloth that gets loose in a sorority. So how does this sloth get into this position? Well, essentially it was caught by an exotic animal hunter that's going to sell this animal on the black market. And our main character, Emily, runs into this guy at the mall because she really wants more followers on social media. She has one good friend, and she has, a friend group in college in her sorority that loves her, that supports her in their own way, but she wants to be popular. She wants to be the new president of this sorority. And so she wants to gain more social media followers, and by running to this guy, he says, oh yes, a good animal is a good way to get more followers and to gain popularity, so you should buy this sloth from me, which is a very normal conversation to hear. And her being an absolute idiot doesn't even consider the fact that this animal was kidnapped illegally and is selling on the black market, and she decides to go for it anyway. And what makes this decision even more ridiculous than it is presented here on screen is the fact that when she goes to buy the sloth, everything already looks disheveled in this place because previously in a scene the sloth gets out of the cage and kills the person that captured it, out in the wild. And so this sloth has already murdered somebody. The sloth is out on the loose and knocked over some cages, and when she gets there, there's literally a loose tiger in the background. She hears some roaring in the background. There's pills just knocked over, spilled on the ground. She sees the sloth and she just steals the sloth. So she doesn't even buy this animal off the black market. She steals this animal off the black market and starts posting on social media. And as the great Philip DeFranco says, if you commit a crime, just don't post about it. I don't know, but people in this world don't care about her having a sloth. The people in this sorority are happy to see this sloth besides the other character in this movie that is also running for president, the person who has gotten president every single year up until this point. Her name is BRIANNA, and I'll get into her in a bit. But that is the general setup for this movie. So you have a character in Emily who makes a really dumb decision to go ahead and buy an illegal animal off the black market to raise her social media presence in order to go head-to-head with BRIANNA in this, race for president in this sorority. And so this is where you get the fun aspects of this movie, because up until this point, yes, it's a lot of setup, it's a lot of establishing what's going on. You get to introduce yourself to this sloth pup, which again, this sloth pup is actually really good. It doesn't necessarily look real, but it has that charm that puppets should have in film, like Grogu does in The Mandalorian, or Yoda did in the original Star Wars, or any number of puppets like the Gremlins in Gremlins. They have a certain charm to them that just make them such a great presence on screen. And this sloth that they name Alpha has just that. She is such a great new slasher killer, I guess, in the world of slashers and killers in film. And so it's just such a fun and inventive way to have this little puppet sloth go around and start murdering people in the second act. And I think the funniest thing about Alpha in this movie is that she has her own personality and her own character and her own viciousness that you get to see throughout the entire film. The opening scene, the introduction of this sloth, is her climbing on a tree, living a peaceful life in Panama before, an alligator snatches the sloth out of the tree into the water, and you see a bunch of blood coming out of the water. I'm like, oh no, this poor sloth just got murdered by an alligator. But then no, you see the sloth climb out of the water very slowly, and you get to see that the alligator was actually slashed open on its stomach, and the alligator was actually the one that was bleeding out in the water. Nice subversion of expectations, but it also set up how vicious this sloth can be to anyone and anything that threatens them in any sort of way. So that is why this sloth killed the big game hunter that, was the one who kidnapped her in the first place. And then when she gets to the place that she needs to be, when she gets to the sorority, the first thing that she does is because she kills the first person that kind of looks at her weird. And even though Emily treats this sloth well, she is not very vicious to the sloth. She's very much using her as a means to gain popularity in social media and in her sorority. And so Alpha quickly figures this out by scrolling through her laptop and seeing the social media post of her taking a selfie with the guy who kidnapped her out of the forest. And so it just goes insane from there, because yes, this sloth can scroll through social media. This sloth can kill an alligator. This sloth can manipulate all these people and get out of any situation, because this sloth is invincible. This sloth goes over and has a great montage while Emily's gaining popularity within the sorority and is having all the success that she is having because of the sloth. The sloth is also going around and killing anybody who looked at her funny, essentially. And the funniest part about this entire second act is the fact that nobody, like, yes, they mentioned, like, oh, where did this character go? She just kind of disappeared after that party. I wonder what happened to her. We're not going to look for her, though. We're just going to move on with our lives and continue to try to win the most votes for president, even though half of your voting base has somehow disappeared throughout this entire mansion. And, the bodies are still there, I'm assuming, so I don't know how the smell isn't going on. This entire second act goes through like 2 weeks of time. I thought maybe this was all going to happen throughout one night at the sorority party, but no, 2 weeks pass by and the sloth is just killing anybody that is not supporting the sloth in any sort of way. And it's so bizarre, but that's also what makes it funny, because this is all intentional. Every time it did another time jump, and they kept on mentioning just in passing, oh, she's been gone for a while. I wonder where she went. Oh, she posted on social media that she left somewhere. Oh, is the sloth posting on social media? I don't know. I think it's hilarious. And I think this is really where this movie found a nice little groove, because yes, that first act was establishing some things with the characters and their motives and the sloth. And once you get into the second act, this montage was easily my favorite part of the entire movie, because, there's a lot of stuff that works about this movie with the comedy, like I said, because it is intentional. All these really goofy and ridiculous things that are not realistic in any sort of way, they always choose as filmmakers to do what is the funniest thing that could happen at this point. Oh no, we're just going to skip 2 weeks and just watch a montage of the sloth killing people while Emily gains popularity. It's the funniest choice that you can ever make, and you poke fun at the ridiculousness of the concept with people just disappearing and nobody caring, and they always make the funniest jokes. And when it comes to the characters in this movie, which I find to be the most interesting part of this film, well, actually the sloth is easily the most interesting part, but the characters themselves are the type of people that I thought I was just going to absolutely hate throughout the entire movie, and that is true. I don't think anybody in this entire film is redeemable, even though Emily's friend is the one like, oh, you should bring the sloth back. You should save the sloth. What are you doing? Don't, take advantage of this sloth that you stole off the black market. But even she doesn't really do anything about it. She just kind of sits by and lets it all happen until she finally tries to do something about it. But obviously that doesn't go well for her. And so I don't know, nobody's likable in this movie, but the reason why I don't get so annoyed and think that these characters are unwatchable, which I think some people find these characters absolutely unwatchable and just awful, is I think the performances are genuinely great in a way that it feels sarcastic, it feels intentional, it feels so over the top, and I think that's every actress in this film and their awkward smiles or their, the look behind their eyes, I feel like they're just, smiling to show face to the people around them, but deep inside they feel such pain for what they're doing, especially BRIANNA's, right-hand woman that is kind of, guiding her entire political, I guess, campaign. She has this smile in this movie that is so funny, because if you can see the pain behind her eyes of having to deal with BRIANNA as a character, because she is just the worst of the worst, but it is just so entertaining. It's kind of hard to describe besides you just watching the movie and seeing these performances. And like I said, some people are going to absolutely hate these characters and think they're annoying and thinking that every single time they cut away from the sloth, it's absolutely unwatchable. But honestly, I was invested in this, role of them trying to gain popularity in this sorority, because these characters were so entertaining to watch. It was like watching a train wreck. You can't look away. You're just watching these people do all these terrible things in I guess in a way to try to gain popularity, and it just feels so entirely satirical. But let's talk about BRIANNA in this movie, because she was probably my favorites, especially her and her group around her that supports her no matter what. Their looks and their dynamic within each other, those side looks and those judgmental smiles, everything about these characters I think worked so well. And BRIANNA was just an awful person, like I said, that is just so entertaining to watch. And I think of all the performers in this movie, I think she absolutely nailed her character. I think the biggest missed opportunities, once you get into the third act of this film, where all the camp has reached the highest level, and the sloth goes and literally drives off in a charger to go kill, the friend that's in the hospital, because, the sloth took her phone and threw it, and she got in the road and she got hit by a car. Because of course, if you have a character who stops in the middle of a road, the funniest thing to happen is if a car comes out of nowhere and just runs her over. It was so funny. But the sloth literally goes, even though they're in a giant party with all these people that the sloth can easily kill, no, this sloth has such a vendetta against this one character that she's going to get into a car, drive it to the hospital, get pulled over, kill the cop. I don't think she killed the cop. I actually don't remember if she killed the cop, but she's going to go into the hospital and smother the friend with a pillow. It was so funny. And then, of course, driving back and getting back to the party. But once things start happening, and once Emily and Brianna figure out that the sloth is killing all these people, once they discover their first body, they have this dynamic with each other in this bathroom where they're kind of arguing with each other of how, oh, your sloth is killing the party. Oh, you're such a bitch. And they do all these funny, this dialogue between each other that is I loved it so much. And I wish that these two characters at this point in the movie teamed up and stayed with each other throughout the final act of this movie, instead of them splitting up once again after this point, because that scene in the bathroom, that dynamic that they had, even though they were beefing throughout the entire movie, them coming together was like a spark of joy in this movie that was already joyous to watch. And at this point, the only thing that this movie has to do is live up to the title of Slotherhouse. It just needs to be an absolute bloodbath of all these sorority girls getting killed by this sloth for doing all these wrong things to this poor creature that was ripped out of its natural habitat. And to a certain degree, the movie does do this. I think there's one really great, actually, I don't think this is in the final act. I think this was the sloth's first kill in the sorority, where it kind of focuses in on the sloth and the hand going down and the blood splattering on the sloth's face and on the wall, and the focus on the fire. That kill was really great, but I don't think anything in the third act, any of the kills, really lived up to the potential, mainly because this movie is PG-13. And I will say there is a possibility of this movie having an unrated cut in the future that is rated R, that shows more gore, but honestly, I don't think that will be the case, because I feel like the filmmaking and the way that these kills are shot feel intentional. It doesn't feel like they were, cutting around the kills in editing. It feels like they were shooting around the kills intentionally, just by the way that they were shot and the way that the editing works. And like I said, I think this movie is crafted really well. I think the editing and the cinematography is very sharp. That's why I think it is all intentional. If they were editing around this being an R-rated movie, honestly, I'm pretty impressed, because usually movies like Megan, you can even tell that they were kind of cutting around being rated R, and you can kind of tell those moments where they held back, they cut away at an awkward moment just to not be rated R. This movie never felt like they cut at awkward moments. It feels like it was as written, it was as designed, and maybe it was budgetary constraints with not having this sloth, physically attacking people and seeing the knife go in, or all these things that you would see or that you'd want to see in an R-rated movie. Maybe it is the budgetary concerns with this puppet and with how they were shooting these kill sequences. Who knows what it is? Maybe there will be an R-rated cut that I think could improve this third act, but as it is, I think it lives up to enough of the title. I think the name drop of the movie by Emily's boyfriend is very, very funny. I think there's a lot of great jokes in this final act. I think the one moment with the sorority mother was so incredibly funny, because she gets stabbed at one point and she's dying. She's, bleeding out slowly, very, very slowly, and she starts talking about how, she feels like she wasted her life. And Emma's like, no, you didn't waste your life. You've done all these great things, and you're a great mother to our sorority. She goes on, no, I only stayed in this sorority because I wanted to be voted president one day spontaneously, even though I'm 40 years old and well past my prime, and the sorority girls were never going to just vote for her out on a whim. And it was such a funny monologue. And then she dies, and then she comes back and she starts complaining about something else in her life that she didn't get to do, how she had I don't remember what degree she had, but she had a degree that she could have used and she never used it. And Emily's like, yeah, I think you actually did waste your life. And then she dies again, but then she wakes up one more time and just drags on for way too long. And that was extremely funny. I think of all the scenes where, like in Deadpool, where Deadpool was dying in Deadpool 2 and they had the monologue and he keeps on going and going and finally dies by the end of it. I think this one is just as successful. But that first monologue that she has about her wasting her life and the fact that she had a degree was so funny. And just as the sorority mom took forever to die, same thing goes for Alpha. Alpha just does not die. She is absolutely invincible in this movie. They take the tiara, stab her in the head with it. They stab her a few times. They shoot her a few times. They take a sword to her. All these crazy things that they do to try to take out this sloth, and none of them work at all. This sloth is just absolutely invincible. And the entire time that they're just abusing this poor animal, I'm like, just somebody pick it up and take it back to the forest. Just do anything to bring it back home. I don't know why any of these characters were trying so hard to brutally murder this sloth and try to save each other in goofy ways. And I think the funniest moment was actually when the friend that was in the hospital who you thought died was smothered by a pillow. I feel like if any places to be smothered by a pillow, I guess it's good to be smothered in a hospital, because they're able to bring her back, and she shows up in this third act and also starts to beat up on this poor sloth. And they're like, just please, somebody save this sloth. And the sloth is at one point lying on the ground, bleeding out, and lifts up its arm and points over to the Panama poster that for some reason is hanging in the sorority house and just says home in his dying breath. And it was so, again, there are so many funny moments in this movie that's kind of hard to pinpoint every single one of them, but there are a couple moments in this movie where the audience started dying laughing. The return of the friend from the hospital was one of them, and this was also another. And so yes, the movie does end with pretty much everybody in the sorority dying, whether it was by electricity or being stabbed to death or any sort of other ways that the sloth murdered people inside of the sorority. But the main cast of characters, the friend, the main character Emily, BRIANNA, and the other friend named ZENNY, who is kind of like the frats character of the sorority, which I thought was also a very funny presence to have in this movie. All of them did make it out of this movie alive, so if they wanted to continue this and make a Slotherhouse 2, they can have the whole cast return for the sequel. But the sloth does get put back in Panama, and it ends off with this tourist group going through and this little girl seeing the sloth and reaching out to pet it, and who knows what this evil murderous sloth is going to do to this poor group visiting the forest. Or maybe the sloth is somehow going to get back to the sorority, and maybe it's going to tie all back together, who knows. But all I know about this movie is that I had a fun time. Like I said, if it was rated R, I think it could have had a little bit more fun with the actual bloody and gory camp that you get in these type of horror movies, and it is PG-13, so take that how you will. But like I said, I think the characters and the performances in this movie are enough to make these characters extremely watchable and enjoyable, even though they're extremely unlikable. And it also has a quality that is just very funny, because I think the writing and the directing and the cinematography and the editing is all in service of making this a really entertaining movie, despite it being absolutely ridiculous. So I went in expecting a movie so bad that it's good, and I got a genuinely enjoyable comedy that knows exactly what it is. And that's all you can ask for a movie called Slotherhouse. So that's going to be my review for Slotherhouse. What did you guys think of it if you saw it in the one-day release in theaters? Was it exactly what Nicole Kidman means when she goes to AMC to feel all the feels in the theater? Or what, did you absolutely hate it? Did you absolutely despise the experience of watching this movie? I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts down in the comments down below. So if you enjoyed this review, make sure you guys leave a like on the channel, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.